third graders, we're going to dive right into our problem set today. I don't have the objective page or the I can statement, but if we just look at the directions real quick, it's pretty self-explanatory. So first of all, we are on lesson 28. So you need your problem set for lesson 28. So make sure you have that. And then you can get your name and date on there. And while you're putting your name and date, I'll read the directions and we'll talk a little bit about what we're doing in this lesson. So the directions say to shade the models to compare the fractions and circle the larger fraction for each problem. So in our lesson today, we have the fraction written in unit form off to the side or in word form off to the side. And we're going to shade what it says. So if you want to grab like a colored pencil or a crayon, that might be easier for you to do the shading today and maybe a little bit more fun. So if you want to grab a colored pencil or a crayon, you just need one color. And then we're going to be comparing fractions. So our I can statement for today, I can compare fractions by their size. Okay. So if you need to pause and grab a crayon or colored pencil, you can do that. And then I'll meet you right back here. Okay. So again, our directions real quick are to shade the models to compare the fractions and circle the larger fraction for each problem. Okay, so the first one says 2/5. So fifths is, if I were to write that as a fraction, it would be 2/5. So the 5, the denominator, the number down on the bottom tells me that I have 5 equal pieces. And I can see that here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'm going to shade in 2 of them, okay? So you can use your, you know what, you go ahead and shade 2, and I'm going to grab a highlighter, I think. Here's one right here. We'll see if it shows up on the pink paper. It's yellow. Yeah, you see that okay? Yes, for sure. Okay, so I'm going to shade in 2 of those. So that is showing 2/5. And the other one says 2/3. So let's write that as a fraction first. Circle that 3. The denominator tells us that we have 3 equal pieces needed to make a whole, and we're going to shade in 2 of those. So for both of them, we're shading in 2. But are the pieces equal? No, they're not. We know that thirds are bigger, because remember that saying, the smaller the denominator, the bigger the piece, right? If you're going to share a candy bar, would you want to share a candy bar between 3 friends or between 5 friends? You'd want to share that candy bar between 3 friends because your pieces would be bigger, right? So our directions here say to circle the larger fraction for each problem. So the larger fraction would be 2/3. So we can say that 2/3 is greater than 2/5. So since our numerator is the same, we look at the denominator. The smaller the denominator, the bigger the piece. Thirds are bigger than fifths, so 2/3 is greater than 2/5. Okay, look at the next one. So we have 2/10. I'm going to write both of these fractions at the same time. 2/10 and 2/8. 2/10 were divided into 10 equal pieces, and 2/8 were divided into 8 equal pieces. Which pieces are bigger? 2/8, right? Because the smaller the denominator, the bigger the piece. The bigger the denominator, the smaller the piece. You would want to share a candy bar between 8 people, not 10, because your pieces would be a little bit bigger. Not much, but they're definitely bigger, right? Go ahead and shade in 2 of each one. All right, and then you want to circle the larger fraction. So which fraction is bigger, 2/10 or 2/8? 2/8 is bigger, right? And we had said that too because 8s are bigger, smaller the denominator, the bigger the piece. So I know that we could easily fly right through this, but I don't want you to go too fast because I want you to still be thinking about the size. I want you to think about the whole saying, the smaller the denominator, the bigger the piece, the bigger the denominator, the smaller the piece, because you won't always have a picture to look at. So I want us to get that in our head too. Okay, so 3/4 and 3/8. Our numerators are the same for both, so we look at the denominators. The first one is split into 4 equal pieces, and we're going to shade 3. The second one is split into 8 equal pieces, and we're going to shade 3. So So we're shading 3 of both, but the denominators is different. The smaller the denominator, the bigger the piece. The bigger the denominator, the smaller the piece. Would you want to share a candy bar between 4 people or between 8 people? Between 4, right? Because then you would get more. So go ahead and shade in 3 of each of these. And then which one is greater? 3/4 is greater, right? And we had said that the smaller the denominator, the bigger the piece. So 3/4 is greater. And I forgot to write these. So 3/4 is greater than 3/8. Remember, the mouth is open, wanting to eat that bigger fraction, because the alligator, if we think of this as an alligator, the alligator wants that bigger piece of chocolate too, right? So it wants to eat the bigger piece, chomp it up. What's our number sentence for this one? So 2/8 was bigger. So 2/8 is greater than 2/10. That mouth is open to eat the 2/8 because it's bigger. So we think of these as our alligators. The alligators want more chocolate too. Good. Why don't you pause it and finish up number 4 and 5 of your own. Don't just blindly color and circle. I want you to think about the denominators too. What do the denominators tell you about the size of the piece, okay? So go ahead and pause your video and finish 4 and 5. And don't forget, like I did, to write your comparing statements onto the right-hand side too, okay? All right, guys, let's see how we did. So the first one was 4/8. That means our picture is split into 8 equal pieces. And then 4/6. This one is split into 6 equal pieces. They both have 4 for denominator, or for numerator, the number on top. So we look at our denominator. The smaller the denominator, the bigger the piece. So these ones, the 6 should be bigger, right? So did you shade in 4 of each? Good. And which one did you circle that was greater, 4/8 or 4/6? 4/6, right? 4/6 had more. It was greater than 4/8. Smaller the denominator, the bigger the piece. So we'll write our comparing equation there. So 4/6 is greater than 4/8. What is 4/8 equal to? Do you see that there? What is 4/8 equal to? Do you see that 4/8 is equal to 1/2? We can see that 4 are shaded and 4 are not shaded. Also, 4 is half of 8. So that tells us that 4/8 is equal to 1/2. It's helpful if we look pretty much anytime we're doing fractions, if we can kind of look for halves or look for wholes, especially halves though, because then we can think of if a fraction is greater than or less than 1/2 when we're comparing. So that's helpful for us. All right, so let's check the last one that you did. So 3/3. So 3 was our numerator. 3 was our denominator. Did you have that? Good. And then 3/6. Ooh, what do you notice about 3/6? I'm going to color it first, and you think about that if you haven't thought about it yet. Let me shade in 3/3. So you guys probably already did this, hopefully. What is 3/3 equal to? 3/3 is equal to a whole, right? So 3/3 is equal to, I'm going to make a big 1 for my 1 whole. When we're saying that a fraction is equal to a whole number, make that whole number as big as a fraction, because it's a good, just kind of a mental reminder to see that on the paper, that it is equal to a whole. And what is 3/6 equal to? Let me color it in. What is 3/6 equal to? 1/2, right? How do you know? Well, half of the picture is shaded. There's 3 shaded and there's 3 not shaded. Also, if I look at the actual fraction, 3 is half of 6, right? Okay. And so we want to say which fraction is bigger. Which fraction is bigger, 3/3 or 3/6? 3/3, because 3/3 is equal to a whole, and only 1/2 of this one is shaded. So when we write our comparing statement, 3/3 is greater than 3/6. How'd you do? Good. Go ahead and flip it over. Alrighty. Let's see here. It says, go ahead and put your finger or your pencil on after softball. Let's read this together. You read it with me? Good. After softball, Leslie and Kelly each buy a half-liter bottle of water. Leslie drinks 3/4 of her water. Kelly drinks 3/5 of her water. Who drinks the least amount of water? Draw a picture to support your answer. Okay, so there's Leslie and Kelly. They each buy a half-liter bottle of water. So that means they're starting out with the same amount, right? And if we're going to compare fractions, that means our whole needs to be the same size to start with. And we know if they each buy a half-liter bottle of water, that the whole is starting out the same. They start out with the same size water bottle to start with. Leslie drinks 3/4 of her water. Kelly drinks 3/5 of her water. Who drinks the least amount of water? Okay, so if I'm going to draw a picture and I'm comparing two amounts, do you remember that we make that big rectangle and then we cut it in half this way? So go ahead and do that on your paper too. So we'll make that big rectangle and then we're going to cut it this way. Okay. And then I'm going to label. So I'm going to put an L here for Leslie, a big L, and she drinks 3/4. So I'm going to put 3/4 right next to Leslie. Leslie, 3/4. And then Kelly drinks 3/5 of her water. Who drinks the least amount? So we do have to draw our picture, but let's compare the fractions just with what we know about fractions before we even draw our picture, okay? The numerators are the same. So the number on the top is the same, which is good. So now we can just look at our denominators to compare. Remember, the smaller the denominator, the bigger the piece. The bigger the denominator, the smaller the piece. So 4 is a smaller denominator. So that means that Leslie's pieces are bigger, which means she drank more, right? Kelly's pieces, the denominator is bigger. So her pieces are smaller, which means that she drank less, okay? And it says who drank the least. So do we agree that we think that Kelly drank less than Leslie? Okay, let's show with our picture though. So it's good to practice that thinking before we actually draw our picture. All right, so for Leslie, the denominator is 4, so that means we're going to split it up into 4 equal pieces. And we're going to shade 3. And if you need to pause your video at any time, you know the drill, right? All right, Kelly drank 3/5 of her water bottle. So we need to split it up into 5 equal pieces. So that means we need 4 lines. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm trying to make my pieces as equal as possible. And then I'm going to shade 3, right? The numerator is a 3, so that tells me that I'm going to shade in 3 pieces. I could have used my highlighter. You can definitely use your colored pencil or your crayon. Okay. So who drinks the least amount of water? Which one has less shaded in? Kelly's has less shaded in, and that's what we thought, right? Good. So let's see if it's asking us to explain. So who drinks the least amount of water? Draw a picture to support your answer. So it doesn't say to explain. Our picture pretty much explains that for us. So Kelly drinks the least amount of water. Make sure that your sentence begins with a capital letter and ends with a period, and everything here should be spelled correctly. 1, because it's right here, and 2, because most of those words are coming right from actually all the words are coming right from the question. Okay. Alrighty. Let's look at number 7. Becky and Mallory. So go ahead and put your finger, your pencil on Becky, and will you read it with me? Good. Becky and Mallory get matching piggy banks. Becky fills 2/3 of her piggy bank with pennies. Mallory fills 2/4 of her piggy bank with pennies. Whose piggy bank has more pennies? Draw a picture to support your answer. So this time we want to know which one has more. The water bottles, we wanted to find out which one had the least. This one is who has the most, okay? So let's take a look. So they have matching piggy banks. That means that the holes are the same size to start out with, right? When we compare fractions, we need them to be the same size to start out with. Becky fills 2/3 of her piggy bank with pennies. Mallory fills 2/4 of her piggy bank with pennies. Do you notice anything about 2/4? You notice. Do you see that 2/4 is 1/2 equal to 1/2, right? Because 2 is half of 4. So it's good for us to look for those halves. Is 2/3 equal to a half? No, because 2 is not half of 3. I can't say 2 plus 2 and get 3, right? But I can say 2 plus 2 equals 4. So that's how I know that that's equal to a half. All right, so Becky 2/3 of pennies, Mallory 2/4 of pennies. Whose piggy bank has more pennies? So who is richer with pennies? Let's do our model again. So do that big rectangle. If you want to pause your video and draw your model, you can sure do that, okay? Don't forget to label. So I'm going to do a B for Becky, and I'm going to write 2/3. I'm going to do an M for Mallory and write 2/4, which I know is equal to a half. So I could technically just shade that right in half, right? Okay, so for Becky, 2/3, I'm going to make 2 lines to split it into thirds. And with what I know, before I even finish this, since my numerators are the same, I look at my denominators, 3 and 4. 3 is the smaller number, so the smaller the number, the bigger the piece. The bigger the number, the smaller the piece. So Mallory's pieces are smaller. Becky's are bigger. So before we even finish drawing, who do we think has more? I think Becky, do you agree? Yeah, let's finish up and see. Okay, so when we cut it into fourths, first of all, we cut it in half, and then we cut the halves in half. And then for each of them, we're going to shade in 2. So for Becky, go ahead and shade in 2, and we can see that Becky's pieces are bigger, right? So the smaller the denominator, the bigger the piece, and we can definitely see that. For Mallory's, we're also going to shade in 2. Who has more, Becky or Mallory? Becky, we were right. Okay, so whose piggy bank has more pennies? Becky. So it doesn't say to explain, we could just answer the question. So Becky's, because our picture is explaining for us, right? Becky's piggy bank has more pennies. Good, what do you think? Good. Okay, if you need to pause to finish up, and then we just have one left and we're all done, okay? So if you need to pause to finish up, and then you can unpause and meet me when at number 8 when you're ready, okay? Okay, put your finger, your pencil on Heidi, and we're talking about 3 dolls here. So we're comparing 3 things this time instead of 2, so this will be fun. Okay, Heidi lines up her dolls in order from shortest to tallest, so that means smallest to biggest. Doll A is 2/4 tall. What do you notice about 2/4? 2/4 is equal to a half, right? Because 2 is half of 4. So let's really get in the habit of looking for halves. Doll B is 2/6 foot tall. Is that a half? Mm-mm. And doll C is 2/3 foot tall. Compare the heights of the dolls to show how Heidi puts them in order. Draw a picture to support your answer. Okay, so this time instead of comparing 2, we're going to compare 3. So let's do our big rectangle still. But this time, instead of cutting it in half to make 2 equal parts, we're going to cut it into thirds. So we want 2 lines going this way so we can make 3 equal parts. So I'm going to put one right there and right there. And that gives us 1, 2, 3 equal parts. Do you see that? So now instead of just comparing 2, we're going to be comparing 3 like this. And our holes are starting out in equal size to start with. So it's just kind of a good way for us to make sure that our holes are the same size. Okay, so doll A is 2/4. So let's do A 2/4. So make sure that's right next to your top one. Doll B is 2/6. And doll C is 2/3. Okay. Are we ready? So if you need to pause to finish labeling that, you can. So A for 2/4. So I look at my denominator and it's 4. So that tells me I'm going to split this into 4 equal pieces. What's my trick for splitting into fourths? Cut it in half. Cut the halves in half. Okay. And how many am I going to shade? 2. So you can use your pencil, your crayons, or your crayon or your colored pencil still, or you can just use your pencil. It's fine, whatever you want to do. Okay, the next one we have for doll B is 2/6. What's our trick for splitting it into 6? Cut it in thirds, right? Cut it in thirds. Make sure your thirds look pretty equal first, and then cut your thirds in half. And how many are we going to shade? 2. So 6 was our number of how many pieces we cut it into. The 2 tells us that we're going to shade 2 equal pieces. And again, you know the drill, guys. If you need to pause at any time to get caught up, I don't want you trying to rush and not listen to what I'm saying. I want you to pause your video so that you're caught up so you can really fully hear, okay? C 2/3. I'm going to split it in thirds. And I can actually use my thirds that I had already here from my 6, right? Because I cut it into thirds first. And so that 3 tells me my denominator 3 equal pieces, and I'm going to shade in 2. Okay, so she's putting these dolls in order from shortest to tallest, so from smallest to biggest. So compare the heights of the dolls to show how Heidi puts them in order. Draw a picture to support your answer. So the shortest one, which would be the shortest one? The shortest one would be doll B. So it would go doll B. And then which one? Doll A, right, would be the next biggest one. And then the last one would be doll C. So the smallest would be B. And then the next smallest would be A. And then the biggest one would be C. Okay, and if I compare my denominators, so I know that since the numerators are all the same, I can compare my denominators. The bigger the denominator, the smaller the piece. So 6 is the biggest number, right? So it makes sense that B would be the smallest doll, okay? And then 4 is your next biggest denominator. So that means the pieces are going to be smaller than thirds, right? Because 4 is bigger than 3. So the pieces are smaller. So it makes sense that A is the next smallest one. And then 3 out of all our denominators is the smallest number. So the smaller the denominator, the bigger the piece. So it makes sense that 2/3 is the greatest one. Okay. So when we put the heights, the dolls in order from least to greatest, let's do this. So we can do B is less than. So the small part of the alligator is pointing towards the smaller number. The mouth is open towards A because A is bigger than B. And A is still less than C. Okay? So we have just been comparing 2, but this is okay because now we can see how we can compare 3 with these sizes of the whole all starting out the same. Okay? So that is our lesson for today. So we were comparing fractions and looking for greater than or less than, comparing fractions and comparing the size of each fraction. Okay? So super work today, and I will see you tomorrow for some more fractions.